So a lot has happened in between the Bible story we read last week and today's. Last week, Moses saw the burning bush, and then after that, Moses went on to have some heated conversations with Pharaoh. Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and at last, Pharaoh set the Israelites free. Moses leads them out across the Red Sea and into the wilderness. There, Moses received, the whole people of Israel received the 10 Commandments on Mount Sinai, and then they continued to wander for 40 long years. And that's where we find them today, at the end of that wandering. A reading from Deuteronomy chapters 5 and 6. Moses convened all Israel and said to them, "Hear, O Israel, the statutes and ordinances that I am addressing to you today. You shall learn them and observe them diligently. The Lord our God made a covenant with us at Horeb, or Mount Sinai. Not with our ancestors did the Lord make this covenant, but with us, all of us here alive today. The Lord spoke with you face to face at the mountain out of the fire, and at that time I was standing between the Lord and you to declare the word of the Lord, because you were afraid because of the fire and did not go up the mountain." And God said these 10 things. Number 1, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an idol, whether in the form of anything that is in heaven above, or on earth below, or the waters underneath the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them, for I, the Lord, am a jealous God, punishing children for the iniquity of parents to the 3rd and 4th generation of those who reject me, but showing steadfast love to the 1,000th generation of those who love me and keep my commandments. Number 2, you shall not make wrongful use of the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not acquit anyone who misuses the name. Number 3, observe the Sabbath and keep the day holy, as the Lord your God commanded you. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. You shall not do any work, you or your children, or your servants, or your ox, or your donkey, or any of your livestock, or the immigrant residing in your towns, so that they all may rest, just as you." And Moses added, "Remember that you were slaves once in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God delivered you from there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God commanded you to keep the Sabbath day." Number 4, honor your father and mother, as the Lord your God commanded you, so that your days may be long and that it may go well with you in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. Number 5, you shall not murder. Number 6, neither shall you commit adultery. Number 7, neither shall you steal. Number 8, neither shall you bear false witness against your neighbor. Number 9 and 10, neither shall you covet your neighbor's wife, neither shall you covet your neighbor's house, or field, or servant, or ox, or donkey, or anything that is your neighbor's. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your might. Keep these words that I command you today in your heart. Recite them to your children, and talk about them when you are at home and when you are away, when you lie down and when you rise. Bind them as a sign on your hand, fix them as an emblem on your forehead, and write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. Word of God, word of life. Thanks be to God. sometimes we need to hear things a second time. I know I do. A repeat, a refresh, a reminder. Have any of you felt that? Maybe you've forgotten something from long ago, something that you kind of remember, but you haven't practiced in a while, like riding a bike, for example, or driving stick shift. Maybe you learned once long ago, and now you find yourself in a new driver's seat, and you're like, what does the clutch do again? How does that work? Maybe it's something like remembering how to read a paper map or a phone book. What are those nowadays? Maybe it looks like returning to a job that you once had but stepped away from for a while. You might need some reminders about what to do, where to go, or what the passwords are. That old saying, it's just like riding a bike, is a little bit more complicated than just that. It's not as easy as just getting on the bike and hitting the road. We might need a reminder. We might need to reteach ourselves. And it's in this spirit that we come to the Ten Commandments today. Remember that Moses himself is reteaching the Israelites right before that they go into the Promised Land. We all need to hear familiar things a second time every once in a while. So, like the Israelites about to journey into the Promised Land, let us receive these 10 commandments. After all, they are for all of us here alive today. So in our own Lutheran history, there's a lot of reteaching that also happens, and I think that this is a helpful starting point. Martin Luther wrote a small catechism meaning a small teaching tool that teaches the foundations of the faith. It includes creeds, Lord's Prayer, and commandments, which is what we're spending today on. And you can actually find this small catechism in the red hymnals in your pews. After the sermon, please. I don't care. It's fine. But Luther wrote this especially to correct some questionable theology that was being poorly taught out in the countryside, and he presented it as a way for families to teach the faith to one another, for parents to teach children. In all of these, everything he treated in the small catechism, Luther presents one simple question, and it's just, what is this? Or was ist das? His answer to the question usually expands out what the meaning of each individual part was, and actually asking this question for us of the 10 Commandments might help us move from a face value understanding of them to a liberating and life-giving one. It might be a refresh that actually brings a new perspective. So first, commandments are just laws, rules. I say this because you might hear me say law at some point, and I mean these commandments. And there's a few different ways to sort through them. The first, actually, you can look at the stained glass window over here. There are 10 commandments split in two, 3 on the left and 7 on the right. The 3 on the left are the ways that humans and God interact. So God says, do not hold idols, do not, what are the other ones? Keep the Sabbath day holy, how we interact with God. And then the 7 on the right are how we interact toward each other. And so these are the things like honor your parents, and do not murder, do not steal, do not covet, or envy. So law is more than shall not. And here's another way to split up the commandments. There's only 2 that say you shall do this thing. This is the 3 divided by God and us. But there's also 8 that say you shall not do these things, and there's only 2 that say you shall. Shall honor your father and mother. You shall keep the Sabbath day holy. Everything else, do not do these things. But there's a flip side to all of those do nots. It's implied that you should do something else. And if we follow that direction, that's where we find a really life-giving and liberating message within the 10 Commandments. Take, for instance, the 5th commandment. You shall not murder. Makes sense, right? But in the small catechism, Luther expands this out Luther understands murder to mean any act of harm toward a fellow person, any act that might lead to their diminishment or perishing. Even our own ignorance and our abandonment, or not wanting to look a certain way, not wanting to turn toward those in need, can lead to this. So the flip side of this shall not murder is that we shall do what we can to help and support our neighbors in times of need. Let that sink in. That we shall do what we can to help and support our neighbors in all need. The flip side of the law is love and support and care. Or another example, take the 8th commandment. Neither shall you bear false witness against your neighbor. What is this? False witness is lies or slander, especially in a court setting. And Luther summarizes this commandment in this way: you shall not use the tongue to harm any neighbor, whether friend or foe. Because unlike that classic phrase, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can never hurt me, Luther stresses that actually they can, and that words can have a big impact on us. He says, there is nothing that can do greater good or greater harm than the tongue. And so, in the small catechism, asking, was ist das, or what is this, Luther writes what we ought to do. We are to come in our neighbor's defense, speak well of them, and interpret everything they do in the best possible light. So what is the flip side of you shall not bear false witness? You are to speak well of your neighbor, come to their defense, and interpret everything they do in the best possible light. The direction of the law leads us toward love, toward a deep love of our neighbor. Love and care is woven deeply into the law. I hope there's a picture coming together that the law is not only a list of shall nots. It's not just a negating or restricting or like scary and judgmental thing. We may have thought of this law as like an opposite to gospel. The classic Lutheran phrase in theology that there's law and gospel kind of sets them up as opposites, but they're actually not really opposed to each other, they're part of each other. Gospel love is inseparable from law. The two are one. Commandments are law, yes, but they are also love. Through what we shall not do, we learn what we shall do and how much we shall honor one another. I am convinced also that that first commandment is perhaps the most important. You shall not hold any idols above God, that the Lord our God is the Lord alone. Moses himself gives us the flip side to this shall not, and that is to love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. And then through our love of God, we in turn love others. So how does this work? A few weeks ago, we had the story of Adam. Our God breathed mud to life. That was the beginning of our messy human story that continues to this day. And I have a question. Can you see that breath in a neighbor? Can we recognize God in the stranger's guise? Can we see that co-equal belovedness in the eyes of our Creator, that belovedness that each one of us has through the love and law of God? Let Luther be a reminder to follow the values behind the law. Notice what direction the commandments lead us toward. They lead us toward union and solidarity with our neighbors. The law asks us to treat one another with utmost respect, love, and honor, to enable one another to pursue the fullest extent of life that we are able. And so ultimately, God's law reveals a better way to live. God's law binds us together It reminds us who we are and whose we are. How we treat one another reflects what we hold true about God. So may the law be inscribed in our hearts. May it lead to flourishing, generous, and abundant life. Amen.